Let's go.
Nick Chubb Jr.
That's what I'm talking about right there. All right, here we go. Our abbreviated U.S. history class today is just going to consist of, since we didn't get to notes in second period because of chapel, we're just going to go over that worksheet you already have. You're going to get this to highlight. If you don't have a highlighter, you can just use your pencil, highlight it later. But let's get that done, shall we? Fill in the blank. Most of the information is provided for you. So, Jamin, if you go back to the first page, it says, it gives you all those main causes for the war. Germany wanted to build up her empire. What's it known when you want to build an empire? What's that word? Yeah. What is that word?
Imperialism.
Imperialism. Now, imperialism is obvious when it's like the British Empire. They had Great Britain, right? And then they had the colonies in the New World, which became the United States. They had claims in Africa, every continent. They pretty much owned Australia, right? So the British Empire was easy to see. Imperialism also gets referred to in U.S. history, even though we didn't necessarily do what Great Britain did and have all of those places in the world that we quote unquote owned. There are people that teach U.S. history from a different perspective than us, and they don't love our history as much as us, because one of the reasons they say is, and the U.S. has always been so imperialistic. So usually when you hear that word attached to the U.S., you should have your alert, your antennae go up, because someone's about to give you a different version of U.S. history based on their bias towards not appreciating and feeling blessed to live here and what a light the U.S. has been to the world. And they're coming from the perspective that because of our imperialistic ways, in other words, we invoke ourselves into all these other places in the world, and it's usually for monetary gain, right? So they would see that as a very negative thing. But anyway, back to World War I. Imperialism was one of the main causes. All these countries trying to expand their territory. Building up your armed forces. What's that known as? Militarism. Now the next one's kind of, I don't even like the way it's worded. What are they looking for here? We call this a worry about blank. Britain, Germany, and other countries were keen to have large empires. So it seems like they're talking about imperialism, right? Other countries building up their armed forces. Sounds like they're talking about militarism. I think in the end, what they're talking about is alliances, because that's the one that doesn't get used besides the other ones. Because those countries are so worried about the others' imperialism and or militarism, that they made alliances. That's a very poorly worded thing there. So anyway, Europe. What's the one that's left then? If you just did process of elimination. When you're proud of your country and you'll defend your country at all costs, that's called nationalism. Again, what's the difference between nationalism and patriotism? Patriotism is loving your country. Nationalism is going a step further and saying that I don't just love my country, I'm not just going to be loyal to my country. I might actually think my country is better than yours. And is that an okay thing? Is that an okay thing? I asked an open-ended question here. There is no right answer. Is that an okay thing? Are some countries better than others? Are you afraid to say that? You are growing up in a world that's going to make you afraid to say that. If you boast about American exceptionalism, some people will shoot you down. Not literally. Well, maybe. If you boast about American exceptionalism or talk about America in these high, in a very lofty way, some people will attribute you to, yeah, see, imperialistic and call you all kinds of names. Okay, the Triple Entente. Remember what that was? If you want to write in the margin there, allies with a capital A. The Triple Entente is what we're going to refer to as the Allies once the war gets started. The Triple Entente was an alliance made long before the war between which three countries? Get it? Triple, three, right? Which three countries was it? Yeah.
British, French, and Russia.
Yeah, Great Britain, France, and Russia. Sometimes when you're just learning this, it's hard for you to put Russia with the good guys, right? There I go again. See, I just made another judgment. Good guys. Sometimes it's hard for you to put Russia because, especially when I was growing up in a period called the Cold War, where Russia was the evil empire, and you learn about World War I, even when I was growing up, like, whoa, you mean Russia was actually on our side at one time? Because they were like the mortal enemy of the United States my whole youth. What about the Triple Alliance? That would have been the other group of allies. The main three were, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Italy's a strange one because, as we'll highlight later in a few minutes, Italy was part of this Triple Entente. They were part of that alliance with Germany. But then when the war broke out, they didn't really join. And when they did join, they joined on the side of the Allies. Kind of weird. Even though they had that alliance with the other two. Okay, this is just fill in the blank, and the word bank's right there. Europe was divided into two alliances. These were called the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. It doesn't matter which order you put those two in. The Entente Alliance or Alliance Entente. Members of each alliance promised to fight for each other if they were attacked. It would only take a small incident to spark a war involving all of Europe. That domino effect. Germany had been trying to build up her navy and her empire. Who was blank about this? Britain was worried about Germany and her militarism and her nationalism and her imperialism. And why do we refer to it as her? There was tension between both countries. This cause is called militarism. The area to the southeast of Austria-Hungary was known as the Balkans. The area was very unstable, and European alliances had different ideas on how to deal with the problem. France was keen for revenge on Germany because of the Franco-Prussian War that happened 40 years earlier. They wanted the land back. They said it had been stolen from them. And then we add this, and then we'll be done. This you'll just highlight. Again, why am I doing this? Because this isn't part of, a lot of this isn't part of the notes. This is kind of taking a 60,000 foot view of the war if you were learning it in world history.
Any day now.
Sid, if you have an extra, just pass it over.
Well, I offered you many lessons to get better at it. You always declined.
Just show me some grades now.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's what counts.
Hopefully you got an extra one there. No?
It's because I'm good with my
Yeah.
hair. You wish you made it my count, but hard work.
Everybody get one?
I need to put it away.
It's all about the future.
Yeah. I gotta get a couple more.
Okay, if you're unfamiliar with this terminology, how many have ever heard this before? Theaters of war. Okay, is that kind of a weird term, like theater? Hey, that's where you go to watch a movie. Theaters of war, just regions of war. And the war, World War I was fought mostly in Europe, right? And we could break Europe into different theaters. When we talk about World War II later, there'll be the European theater, and there'll be the, who can give me some advance? The two major theaters, well, there's many, more than two. So you have the European theater of World War II. What did they call our war with Japan? Anybody know? What would be the name of that theater? It'll be the Pacific Theater. Then it'll be the African Theater. Okay, ready? Although World War I was a world war, most of the fighting was confined to a few key areas, and they're usually called theaters of war. When I get to a point I need you to highlight or underline, if you don't have your highlighter, I'll stop and emphasize it. Ready? Just read with me. The German army crossed the Belgian border on August 3rd. We have that in our notes. Britain and France declared war on Germany on the 4th. We have that in our notes. The Germans pushed through Belgium and entered France. We have that in our notes. The British and French armies marched to stop the German advance. We have that in our notes, that they tried to stop them. What we don't have is where they stopped them. So highlight the Battle of Marne, the 4th through 10th of September. By the way, how many know that in Europe, when you write the date, like I would have written the date in Europe, it would have said 2311. You guys all know that? In German? Okay. Yeah, they say the date and then the month. Anyway, 4th through 10th of September in 1914. What was the battle called? We already talked about how they stopped them before they got to Paris. Now you know the name of the battle. It was the Battle of Marne. Again, that's a river. Okay, now don't highlight until I stop you again. To avoid losing the territory already gained in France, the Germans began digging trenches. We already know that. Turned into trench warfare, right? The British and French, unable to break through the line of trenches, highlight that. I mean, I know we already know, but in this paragraph, highlight line of trenches, and then highlight the last two words, Western Front. What are we doing there? We're just highlighting, hey, the Western Front was what kind of warfare? Trenches. Do you understand what we mean by front? A front is kind of a dividing line, a border. A weather front is where the warm and the cold air are separated, right? Your front porch separates your home from the rest of the world, right? A front is a place where you're separated. So along the Western Front, and then if there's a Western Front, there's probably an Eastern Front. So what was that like? It was not trench warfare. The Eastern Front, if we move to that section, it says the line of fighting on the eastern side between, and you should highlight this, Russia and Germany and Austria-Hungary. Who was fighting in the east? Not the Brits, not the French. It was Russia against Austria-Hungary and Germany. And then highlight Eastern Front. Fighting began on the Eastern Front when, highlight this, Russia invaded East Prussia on August 17th, 1914. Prussia is no longer a place on the map. If you lived in Europe, if you lived in Germany or Poland or in that area, you probably would still refer to certain regions as Prussia, but it's not a country these days. Germany immediately launched a counteroffensive and pushed Russia back. Highlight this. This pattern of attack and counterattack continued for the first 2 years. So what was fighting like in World War I? Well, on the Western Front, it was trench warfare. Hardly any movement at all. Deadlock, stalemate, very few ground gain, or very little. On the Eastern Front, for a while, Russia was winning. Then Germany turned the tide, and they took territory back. And then Russia took advantage again. It was kind of a back and forth. Neither side was making great gains. They'd win some, they'd lose some. This went on for 2 years until the Russian people kind of got fed up. And there was something else going on in Russia. They were about to experience a communist revolution. And historically, communists are known as pacifists. You know what a pacifist is? What's a pacifier do? Why was it called the Pacific Ocean? Remember that? What's a pacifier do? Calms, quiets the baby. It means peace, right? So a pacifist is someone that they don't believe in war at all. They want peace. All they want is peace. Maybe not to the point that's not even realistic. Like we talked, I think yesterday, like nobody likes war. I hope. There are crazy people, right? But generally, even great generals would tell you that they hate war, but sometimes